was not heavily populated at the time, although her house was close to a public house called the Hole in the Wall. Thomas was described by her doctor, George Henry Rudd, as a small, well-dressed lady who was about 54 years old. Elliot O'Donnell, summing up contemporary accounts in his introduction to a transcript of Webster's trial, said that Thomas had an excitable temperament and was regarded by her neighbors as eccentric. She frequently traveled. She sounds kind of fun, to be honest. She frequently traveled, leaving her friends and relatives unaware of her whereabouts for weeks or months at a time. Thomas was a member of the lower middle class, and as such was not wealthy, but she habitually dressed up and wore jewelry to give the impression of her prosperity. Her desire to employ a live-in domestic servant probably had as much to do with status as with practicality. However, she had a reputation for being a harsh employer, and her irregular habits meant that she had difficulty finding and retaining servants. Before 1879, Thomas had been able to keep only one maid for any length of time. Damn, like how bad was she? I wish we knew more. On January 29th, 1879, Thomas took on Kate Webster as her servant. Webster had been born as Kate Lawler in Killan, County Wexford, near Enniscorthy, in about 1849. She was later described by the Daily Telegraph as a tall, strongly made woman of about 5 feet 5 inches in height, with sallow and much freckled complexion and large and prominent teeth. The details of Webster's early life are unclear, as many of her later autobiographical... Oh, I think that's a motorcycle. I was like, what is that? That scared me. The details of Webster's early life are unclear, as many of her later autobiographical statements proved unreliable, but she claimed to have been married to a sea captain called Webster, by whom she had 4 children. According to Webster's account, all the children died, as did her husband, within a short time of each other. How? What? She was imprisoned for larceny in Wexford in December of 1864, when she was only about 15 years old, and came to England in 1867. In February 1868, she was sentenced to 4 years of penal servitude for committing larceny in Liverpool. Webster was released from jail in January of 1872, and by 1873 she had moved to Rose Gardens in Hammersmith, West London, where she became friends with a neighboring family named Porter. On the 18th of April, 1874, she gave birth to a son who she named John W. Webster in Kingston upon Thames. The identity of the father is unclear, as she named 3 different men at sentenced to 18 months in Wandsworth prison. Not long after leaving prison, Webster was arrested again for larceny and was sentenced to another 12 months imprisonment in February of 1877. Damn girl. Her young son was cared for in her absence by Sarah Crease, a friend who worked as a charwoman for a Miss Loader in Richmond. What the hell is a charwoman? A charwoman is an old-fashioned occupational term referring to a paid part-time worker who comes into a house or other building to clean it for a few hours of a day or week, as opposed to a maid who usually lives as part of the household within the structure of a domestic service. A charwoman might come through an employment agency or might work independently. Interesting. Okay. In January 1879, Crease fell ill and Webster stood in for her as a temporary replacement at Loader's house. Loader knew Thomas as a friend and was aware of her wish to find a domestic servant. She recommended Webster on the basis of the latter's temporary work for her. When Thomas met Webster, she engaged her on the spot, though she did not appear to have many inquiries about Webster's character or past. Big mistake. After Webster was taken on by Thomas, the relationship between the two women appeared to have deteriorated rapidly. Thomas disliked the quality of Webster's work and frequently criticized it. Webster later said, "At first I thought her a nice old lady, but I found her very trying, and she used to do so many things to annoy me during my work. When I had finished my work in my rooms, she used to go over it again after me and point out places where she said I did not clean, showing evidence of a nasty spirit towards me." Webster, in turn, became increasingly resentful of Thomas, to the point that Thomas attempted to persuade friends to stay with her as she did not like to be alone with Webster. It was arranged that Webster would leave Thomas's service on the 28th of February. Thomas recorded her decision in her last diary entry. Quote, "Gave Catherine warning to leave," end quote. Webster persuaded Thomas to keep her on for a further 3 days until Sunday, the 2nd of March. She had Sunday afternoons off as a half day and was expected to return in time to help Thomas prepare for evening service at the local Presbyterian church. On this occasion, however, Webster visited the local alehouse and returned late, delaying Thomas's departure. The two women quarreled, and several members of the congregation later reported that Thomas had appeared very agitated on arriving at the church. She told a fellow congregant that she had been delayed by the neglect of her servant to return home at the proper time, and said that Webster had flown into a terrible passion upon being rebuked. Thomas returned home from church early, about 9 p.m., and confronted Webster. According to Webster's eventual confession, Mrs. Thomas came in and went upstairs. I went up after her, and we had an argument, which ripened into a quarrel, and in the height of my anger and rage, I threw her from the top of the stairs to the ground floor. She had a heavy fall, and I became agitated at what had occurred. Lost all control of myself, and to prevent her screaming and getting me into trouble, I caught her by the throat, and in the struggle, she was choked, and I threw her on the floor. The neighbors, a woman named Ives, Thomas's landlady, and her mother heard a single thump like that of a chair falling over, but paid no heed to it at the time. Next door, Webster began disposing of the body by dismantling scenes, she was packing the dismembered remains into a black Gladstone bag and a corded wooden bonnet box. She was unable to fit the murdered woman's head and one of the feet into the containers and disposed of them separately. Throwing the foot onto a rubbish heap in Twickenham, the head was buried under the hole in the wall stables a short distance from Thomas's house, where it was found 131 years later. What? That is insane. On March 4th, Webster traveled to Hammersmith to see her old neighbors, the Porters, whom she had not seen for 6 years, wearing Thomas's silk dress and carrying the Gladstone bag which she had filled with some of the remains. Webster introduced herself to the Porters as Mrs. Thomas. She claimed that since last meeting the Porters, she had married, had a child, been widowed, and had been left a house in Richmond by an aunt. She invited Porter and his son Robert to a pub, the Oxford and Cambridge Arms in Barnes. Along the way, she disposed of the bag that she was carrying, probably by dropping it in the River Thames, while the Porters were inside the pub drinking. It was never recovered. Webster then asked young Robert Porter if he could help her carry a heavy box from 2 Mayfield cottages to the station. As they crossed Richmond Bridge, Webster dropped the box into the Thames. She was able to explain it away and did not arouse Robert's suspicions. The following day, however, the box was found washed up in the shallow water next to the riverbank about 5 miles downstream. It was spotted by Henry Wheatley, a coal porter who was driving his cart past Barnes Railway Bridge shortly before 7 in the morning. He initially thought that the box might contain the proceeds of a burglary. He recovered the box and opened it, finding that it contained what looked like body parts wrapped in brown paper. The discovery was immediately reported to the police, and the remains were examined by a doctor who found that they consisted of the trunk minus entrails and legs minus 1 foot. What do they mean by trunk? The torso or trunk. I've never heard it be called the trunk. That is so strange. So it consisted of the torso and legs of a woman. The head was missing and was later assumed to have been thrown into the river separately by Webster. But now we know that it was buried by the hole in the wall, and it was discovered 131 years later. That's so insane. Like, what? Okay. Around the same time, a human foot and ankle were found in Twickenham. It was clear that all of the remains belonged to the same corpse, but there was nothing to connect them with Thomas and no means to identify the remains. The doctor who examined the body parts erroneously attributed them to a young person with very dark hair. An inquest on 10 or the 11th of March. An inquest on the 10th or the 11th of March resulted in an open verdict on the cause of death, and the unidentified remains were laid to rest in Barnes Cemetery on the 19th of March. The newspapers dubbed the unexplained murder the Barnes mystery, and speculation that the body had been used for dissection and anatomical study. I cannot speak today. I keep tripping over my words. It was later alleged that Webster had offered 2 pots of lard to a neighbor, supposed to have been rendered from Thomas's boiled fat. I hope that's not true. That is so gross. However, no evidence about this was offered at the subsequent trial, and it seemed likely that the story is merely a legend, particularly as several versions of the story appeared to exist. I hope it is, because that is so vile. Webster continued to live at 2 Mayfield cottages while posing as Thomas, wearing her late employer's clothes and dealing with tradesmen under her newly assumed identity. On March 9th, she reached an agreement with John Church, a victualler from Hammersmith, to sell Thomas's furniture and other goods to furnish his pub, the Rising Sun. He agreed to pay her 68 pounds, probably pounds, I don't know, with an interim payment of 18 pounds in advance. Why don't I know this symbol? Is that pounds, you guys? I'm sorry. By the time that the removal horse and cart arrived on the 18th of March, the neighbors were becoming increasingly suspicious as they had not seen Thomas for nearly 2 weeks. Her next-door neighbor and landlady, Miss Ives, asked the delivery men who had ordered the goods removed. They replied, Mrs. Thomas, and indicated Webster. Realizing that she had been exposed, Webster fled immediately, catching a train to Liverpool and traveling from there to her family home at Enniscorthy. Meanwhile, Church realized that he had been deceived. When he went through the clothes in the delivery van, he found a letter addressed to the real Thomas. The police were called in and searched 2 Mayfield cottages. There they discovered bloodstains, burned finger bones in the hearth, and fatty deposits behind the copper, as well as the letter left by Webster giving her home address in Ireland. They immediately put out a wanted notice, giving a description of Webster and her son. Detectives from Scotland Yard soon discovered that Webster and her son had fled back to Ireland aboard a coal steamer. The head constable of the Royal Irish Constabulary in Wexford realized that the woman being sought by Scotland Yard was the same person whom his force had arrested 14 years previously for larceny. The RIC were able to trace Webster to her uncle's farm at Killan, near Enniscorthy, and arrested her there on the 29th of March. She was taken to Kingstown, which is known as the modern-day Dun Leary, and from there back to Richmond via Holyhead in the custody of the Scotland Yard policemen. On hearing of the crime with which she was charged, Webster's uncle refused to give her shelter to her son, and the authorities sent the boy to the local workhouse until such time as a place could be found for him in an industrial She pleaded not guilty, and her defense sought to emphasize the circumstantial nature of the evidence, highlighting her devotion to her son as a reason why she could not have been capable of the murder. However, Webster's public unpopularity, impassive demeanor, and scanty defense counted strongly against her. A particularly damning piece of evidence came from a bonnet maker named Maria Durden, who told the court that Webster had visited her a week before the murder and had said that she was going to Birmingham to sell some property, jewelry, and a house that her aunt had left her. The jury interpreted this as a sign that Webster had premeditated the murder and convicted her after deliberating for about an hour and a quarter. Shortly after the jury returned its verdict and just before the judge was about to pass sentence, Webster was asked if there was any reason why sentence of death should not be passed upon her. She pleaded that she was pregnant in an apparent bid to avoid the death penalty. The Law Times reported that upon this sentence of uncertainty, if not of confusion, ensued, certainly not altogether in harmony with the solemnity of the occasion. The judge commented that after 32 years in the profession, he was never at an inquiry of this sort. Eventually, the clerk of assize suggested using the archaic mechanism of a jury of matrons, constituted from a selection of the women attending the court, to rule upon the question of whether Webster was with quick child. 12 women were sworn in along with a surgeon named Bond, and they accompanied Webster to a private room of an examination that only took a couple minutes. They returned a verdict that Webster was not quick with child, though this did not necessarily mean that she was not pregnant, a distinction that led the president of the Obstetrical Society of London to protest at the use of the obsolete medical assumption that the unborn child is not alive until the so-called quickening. A few days before Webster was due to be executed, an appeal was submitted on her behalf to the Home Secretary, R.A. Cross. It was turned down with an official statement that after considering the arguments put forward, the Home Secretary had failed to discover any sufficient ground to justify him in advising Her Majesty to interfere with the due course of the law. Before she was executed, Webster made 2 statements confessing to the crime. In her first, she implicated Strong, the purported father of her child, who she said had participated in the murder and was responsible for leading her into a life of crime. She recanted on the 28th of July, the night before she was due to be executed, making a further statement in which she took sole responsibility and exonerated Church, Porter, and Strong of any involvement. She was hanged the following day at Wandsworth Prison at 9 a.m., where the hangman, William Marwood, used his newly developed long drop technique to cause instantaneous death. After her death was certified, she was buried in an unmarked grave in one of the prison's exercise yards. The crowd waiting outside cheered as a black flag was raised over the prison walls, signifying that the death sentence had been carried out. An auction of Thomas's property was held at 2 Mayfield cottages on the day after Webster's execution. Church managed to obtain Thomas's furniture after all, along with numerous other personal effects, including her pocket watch and the knife with which she had been dismembered. Why would you want that? That is so creepy. The copper in which the body had been boiled was sold for 5 shillings. Why would you want that? Why would you want that? Other visitors contented themselves with taking small pebbles. Ew. People are so creepy. Other visitors contented themselves with taking small pebbles and twigs from the garden as souvenirs. The house itself remained unoccupied until 1897, as nobody would live there after the murder. Even then, according to the occupant, servants were reluctant to work at such a notorious place. Whew, my god, I feel like I've been talking for ages. which is